This video is made possible through the direct financial support of my Ko-fi page, the TLGTW official fan club. To the committee members, with thanks. To the I and Gold committee members, Enid, the game's nihilist, with special thanks. And to every other member of the OF who has donated to support me, thank you even more. So I burn, consider me yours. Disclaimer, this series spoils everything in Elden Ring, up to and encompassing all 3 endings, every level, and every major boss. Being episode 3, this video also builds off of the information established in episode 2, where fate and gravity are explained, and episode 1, where just about everything is explained. Don't believe me? Check them out for yourselves and see. But if you're comfortable where you are, we'll begin with Elden Ring Explained, episode 3. There are some wrinkles in the carpet that I ought straighten out. Mistakes I made in episode 1, and details I happened to miss that, if the desired posterity of this show should be achieved, I must properly account for. Starting with, as I had promised way back when episode 1 itself had first been released, fixing how I covered the definition of an Empyrean. Because, you see, whether or not I consider something to be background noise, for a topic as incredibly fucking relevant to Elden Ring's story as what an Empyrean is, when the title of your video includes the words Empyreans explained in it, you need a lot better of a fucking excuse than that to avoid, literally, explaining Empyreans. I am sorry. I should have covered it properly in the first place. And so, allow me to compensate. Perhaps even overcompensate. We start with covering Ranni's dialogue, recited to us in Ainsel River. Specifically, these 3 lines.
I was once an Empyrean, of the demigods. Only I, Miquella, and Malenia could claim that title. Each of us was chosen by our own 2 fingers, as a candidate to succeed Queen Marika, to become the new god of the coming age.
I have been told that these lines express that Empyreans are made through being chosen by the 2 fingers, based upon subjective factors. This, however, is a misreading. As the lines themselves describe, of the demigods, the only people who were capable of having the title of Empyrean were Ranni, Miquella, and Malenia. Then, because they could claim this title, the 2 fingers chose them as potential candidates to succeed Queen Marika. This is why, for example, someone like Godwyn the Golden was notably among those not selected as a potential successor to Queen Marika. Despite his being a member of the Golden lineage, and thus politically perfect as a successor to Queen Marika, as he was by legitimate right in line to inherit the throne of Leyndell, an extremely powerful warrior, as shown by his ending of the war against the dragons through the defeating and sparing of Fortisax, and an incredibly skilled politician, since we know it was his friendship with Fortisax that led to the founding of the ancient dragon cult in Leyndell, an institution that, successfully, argued that the ancient dragons, in reality, weren't a threat to the Erdtree after all, and thus not enemies to be wiped out or assimilated like the fire giants and Liurnians were, resulting in not only the people of Farum Azula retaining their freedom of religion, but the already humongous military might of the Elden Ring's forces then exploding with the additional power of lightning spells, and the joining of the ancient dragons themselves as fighters on Leyndell's side. All while, mind you, more than half of the fucking city having been destroyed, and the corpse of the guy that did it still looming over everyone's heads. And yet, despite all of these incredible exemplary qualities that would have made Godwyn a frankly cartoonishly perfect successor to lead Marika's empire, he was, as we see, not among the demigods who were able to claim the title of Empyrean. And thus, along with every other non-Empyrean demigod, Godwyn was not chosen by the 2 fingers as a potential successor to Queen Marika. So, since there were only 3 people allowed to claim the title of Empyrean, what made Ranni, Miquella, and Malenia so special? After we defeat Malenia, her remembrance of the rock goddess tells us how she, Miquella, and Ranni were able to claim the title of Empyrean. Namely, by being born of a single god. Of especially to note here for Malenia's remembrance is how the statement for our Empyreans is in present tense. So it isn't being born of one god makes you into an Empyrean passively. It's being born of one god is being an Empyrean actively. Now, with the fictional concept here of a special condition being dependent on having been born a certain way, it's obviously not invalid to phrase it like this. But why exactly is it phrased like this? Especially where the statement directly after, suffered afflictions from birth, is phrased in the just as correct and far more normal passive past tense instead. Well, it's not by mistake. As we covered in the first episode, Elden Ring's main menu is deliberately written to always match the style of the narrator is never ever incorrect ever. And so, outside of real-life errors like mistranslations and typos, the menu's narrator never tells us, the player, something that is technically incorrect. And since, as it would happen, of the demigods, there is exactly one person, not Miquella or Malenia, who was Empyrean. A very specific demigod who, as also covered in episode 1, made herself literally unborn, and thus, as she indeed tells us, not an Empyrean anymore. Yes, that is actually the reason why. Where the menu's narrator is purposely written in the style of never being incorrect, the reason this part of Malenia's remembrance is written with present tense is because it is accounting for RANNI, the lunar witch who, instead, merely was born of a single god. And so, rather than still being one, like the twin prodigies are, she is someone who was once an Empyrean instead. And for the record, yes, this matches how Malenia's remembrance is written in the original Japanese as well. I checked. So, to reconfirm, where being able to claim the title of Empyrean is dependent on remaining born a certain way, as described in Malenia's remembrance, because RANNI is literally not someone who counts as born. This is why she refers to herself as someone who used to be an Empyrean, but isn't anymore, despite evidently still retaining a capacity to become the new god of the coming age, and continuing to pursue what she yet calls the dark path of the Empyrean. While RANNI still has all of the functional and magical shit that came from being an Empyrean, because being Empyrean in the first place is, specifically, a status in reference to the circumstances of someone's birth, RANNI, the unborn demigod, considers herself not to be an Empyrean anymore correctly. This might help in illustrating somewhat where my misplaced incredulity in the first episode had been coming from. I will still not try to justify my original decision, on account of that it was a bad one. But you can see where I had been coming from, right? This fucking insanely precise interlocking of tense. They don't exactly just fall out of the sky, right? You see what I had thought that everyone else was also seeing, right? More still, however, at the same time as all this, I also apologize for getting on people's cases for potentially misreading Malenia's remembrance in the first place. I have since been informed that conjunctive adverbs are not taught in grade 2, like I had said, but are in fact taught in high school. And as someone who barely even graduated high school, I do not blame anybody anymore for having gotten their grammar wrong in interpreting this. Not knowing high school level shit is not a big deal. So for me to have gotten on people's cases about it, even without realizing, was stupid. And so, even though it was really funny, I take it back. Before we go on, if you happen to be someone watching this who has not seen episode 1 of this show, and you're wondering why the Two Fingers chose to only distinguish Empyreans as potential successors to Marika instead of anyone else, and further yet, how RANNI appears to count as a child of a single god in the first place, the answers to those questions and more await you there. But for the special sake of compensating for my negligence in having skipped all this shit in the first place, allow me to directly address the specific questions response to episode 1 regarding the topic of Empyreans. 1. What about Miquella's Great Rune? Since Miquella is still alive, his Great Rune is inside his body. 2. Is being born with an affliction an inherent part of being born of one god? No. As stated by Malenia's remembrance, that despite being born as Empyreans, the twin prodigies were also born with afflictions. Malenia's Great Rune, stating that it was supposed to have been the most sacred of all, showing their afflictions were not anticipated. And by there being no mention of RANNI being born with an affliction herself, despite her having been an Empyrean, it is shown that the disabilities Malenia and Miquella were born with had been unique to them. That is to say, where being born of one god resulted in the twins being Empyreans, something besides being born of one god resulted in them being born with afflictions. Learning from the other of the only 2 items we received from that boss fight, that the twins were conceived through Marika's sexually reproducing with, effectively, an exact genetic copy of herself, by the process of elimination, our mysterious outside factor behind the twin demigods' birth defects is easy to deduce. Three. Were Queen Marika and the Glowmite Queen also born of one god? Since we don't know anything about Queen Marika's heritage besides her ethnicity as a Numen, and we don't even know who the Glowmite Queen is, there is nothing to indicate that the rules regarding Empyreanness that we know so far, applying to RANNI, Miquella, and Malenia, cannot also apply to Queen Marika and the GEQ. At the same time, of course, since the circumstances of Queen Marika's birth and the GEQ's identity don't currently exist in the game, it isn't possible for such holes in the story to be able to contradict or corroborate with anything yet anyway. It remains possible, dare I say, very likely, that upcoming content for the game will give us this kind of information. But currently, there is nothing. As such, sweet reader, you are left with a decision to make. A decision deciding your future. You may either, 1. Continue your journey by making shit up. Or 2. You can stop where you are now, sit down, and wait. With me. 4. Since RANNI is a member of the Carian royalty and daughter to Rennala, how can she also be a descendant of Queen Marika? The answer to this is fortunately quite simple. For you see, there's this thing called adoption. 5. If the Two Fingers only chose Empyreans as potential successors to Queen Marika, but being Empyrean has no correlation to one's individual ability, doesn't that mean there's nothing to actually ensure Marika's successor and the subsequent age to have preceded the Golden Orders would actually be any good? Yes, that would be the logical conclusion. And considering the state Melania was born in, it's hard to say that that potential successor would have even survived to succeed Marika at all, if she and Miquella had never defected from their mother's empire in the first place. In fact, with it put so directly like that, it's kinda almost like the game is trying to say that an allegorical system of government, where its leaders are chosen based on their literal blood purity, as opposed to something like their individual skills and motives as leaders, would be bad. 6. Are you sure Empyreans aren't still chosen based on external factors? Yes, we can be sure of this. As shown through the prospect of someone's Empyrean status being dependent on anything other than their physical bodies, not being present in Elden Ring, with regards to the canon of this game, where my work ends and yours begins, there is only one way for someone to be an Empyrean, and that is being born of a single god. Am I, however, not simply being obtuse? Can I deny the capacity for such a thing in itself? Is it not canonically feasible, at least from the currently available information, that being an Empyrean might be based on external factors, like someone's individual ability or power instead? Well, unless there is something I missed in regards to what the apparent abilities a pair of fucking babies, one with a terminal illness and the other with a developmental disorder, are supposed to have had, that the two fingers considered indicative of them being a better candidate for replacing Marika than literally anyone else, then the answer is no. And so, to properly confirm the first basic fact expressed in the third part of the first episode of this show, regarding exclusively the canon story of this game, it is not ambiguous that what determines if someone is an Empyrean or not is whether they are the child of a single god. Due to, as we have just gone over, the only information that is present in the game itself regarding how an Empyrean is defined is, Empyreans are those born from a single god. It is therefore, objectively speaking, true, and I will reiterate that it is singularly my arbitrarily decided dependence on this specific conditional requirement that makes a statement of even any validity in the first place, that in Elden Ring, an Empyrean is a child of a single god. Is it literally possible that there are more ways for someone to be an Empyrean than just this? Yes, this is fiction, and Empyrean is a fictional term. It is literally possible for such to be the case. Possibility, however, is not relevant in this context. What is relevant in this context is that currently there is only one. And because Melania's remembrance is so explicit with this fact, that is why I said everything else might as well be background noise and skipped over it. I thought it would be a waste of time, and for a video as long as that was, you can imagine why taking even more time to make it was a topic on my mind. Obviously, this was all still very foolish. Along with, I will admit, the frustration I unleashed upon myself for not covering something that I knew full fucking well was the most emotionally charged topic in the entire video. There were no good reasons for having skipped over it. I should not have done so. That all said though, it was still really, really, really obvious that this was the case. Some of the things that I have been told actually contradict Melania's remembrance have just astounded me. And to be clear, this does not actually matter, at all. And I know that from a more neutral perspective, it's inappropriate for me to include this part in the video. But I want some petty fucking catharsis on this because I'm serious. First of all, Queen Marika and the Glomide Queen are also Empyreans, and so on, are not statements that are able to contradict Empyreans are those born of a single god. One point of information says x equals 1. Another point of information says y equals x. How on earth does one even find a contradiction out of this? I'm fucking serious. I did not realize at first what people were talking about when they brought up Marika and the Glomide Queen. How is Marika born? We have no way of telling. The currently available information regarding this, to repeat, plot hole, is 0, And as we all know well enough, I hope, putting +0 in the middle of an equation isn't going to end up changing its outcome. So I really don't know why it's brought up as if it even had the capacity to contradict Malenia's remembrance in the first place. But this isn't the kind of twisting yourself into knots that I'd complain about anyway. In fact, in my honest opinion, it ostensibly doesn't even count as a mistake. It's literally just misremembering the game. Something that's, for obvious reasons, the most normal thing in the universe. The real kind of knotting I was complaining about was more along the lines of some people seeming to just adamantly misread the words themselves. For instance, no, Malenia's remembrance does not maybe suggest that being born of one god is why the twin prodigies were born with their afflictions, because it says so right there that they got their afflictions with the word that means despite. And yet, I have been told by more than one person, not just that the word but is just randomly interchangeable with the word and somehow, but also that it is actually supposed to be impossible to tell as to how the term as such works when it connects two sentences. As if the clauses being connected are not the ones it's fucking sandwiched between. This is the fucking thing that, legit baffles me in real life. I'm unable to emotionally relate to how this idea has managed to spread among any multiple of people. How does someone justify to someone else just, I don't know, forgetting what the words as such and but mean, but just only this one time for just only this one sentence? I feel like the fact that more than one person got on my case for not also forgetting what certain words mean like they did, and determining that, instead of having made a simple fucking grammar mistake, something that every human on planet Earth makes 80 gajillion times a year, that Malenia's remembrance is just intentionally incoherent, and therefore impossible for them to have ever been wrong about in the first place, must speak to the level of insecurity some people appear to have with their reading comprehension skills. I don't know how to divide fractions, right? That doesn't turn the task into something that's fucking ambiguous. 'Cause newsflash, not knowing something just means that you didn't know it. It does not automatically mean that that thing that you didn't know had actually just been, never something that was possible to figure out in the first place. And it isn't like not knowing something is ending the fucking world either. So corn me on the cob as to wherever the hell the inspiration for this random ass denialism is coming from anyway. Okay, I had my fun. 'Cause obviously I do know where it's coming from. Nobody doesn't. Even when it's not our fault, a lot of us care about being wrong about things because we think being wrong about things makes us look dumb. It isn't exactly rocket science to deduce from there why not wanting to look dumb then leads to some people acting cornered when faced with the prospect of having been wrong about something that they thought they were totally right about. It's like the square of being wrong when that happens. Even so, it's apparent that nobody here forgot on purpose, nor is the feeling itself something worthy of feeling embarrassed about either. And so, while it does definitely infuriate me specifically when people incorrectly try to refute my understanding of grammar, grammar itself is not actually important. So it's high time I stop teetering around what actually is important and cut the dramatics. These videos mostly present themselves as if they exist in a vacuum. This is on purpose, of course, and I do intend on putting that procession back up after this particular segment is over. But for this topic specifically, pretending that this is the case is not suitable. Because I am indeed old enough within the context of FromSoft story analysis to be aware that even sounding like you are an authority is enough on its own to frighten some people. Now, I am under no mistake that the people of whom I am complaining are not the majority. And when I had first come up with this show and released episode 1, I thought that I would not care about this. As it turns out, I actually do. It would seem that I'm uncomfortable with the idea of someone thinking that they, Or, I guess, something that they like doing is being insulted by me when it's actually from a misunderstanding. This being opposed to, of course, when someone is feeling insulted by me while I am insulting them. In that case, I'm completely comfortable. It only makes me uncomfortable when that is not the case. And when I began this series of explaining the canonical events and their relevant themes in Elden Ring's story, I had done so with the awareness that to some, terms like canon and objective were words to denote authority or value rather than, well, what they accurately mean. And so it seems, I am simply too sentimental about this kind of thing. I don't like the idea of leaving anyone behind just because I'm on a different dance floor than they are, if I haven't shown the invitation, as it were, to step onto mine if they wanted to. Or, of course, unless I kick them off myself, as previously mentioned. Where the deeper meaning behind the concepts of objective and subjective are, in my consideration, fundamental to actually understanding the themes and morals of this game's story, most especially in regards to its elements surrounding the enforcement of ideologies, my being, as I'm sure you've come to notice, a bit of a freak when it comes to leaving stones unturned, the evident congruence with this series' explicit goal, and finally, the emotional factors you've just now heard, it is worth it to lay down the facts of these matters fully, better than before, without any uncertainty whatsoever, for reals, before we actually continue on with the following corrections for episode 1. So, here we go. I have stated that the main limitation of this show is that I, its dashing host, am restricted to only use information that is canonical, meaning here, information that itself objectively exists within the game. This is why I haven't tried to fill in any of the plot holes left like those concerning Miquella and the Glow-Eyed Queen within these episodes. And it's also why, where I bring up the themes and real-life parallels and stuff that I consider relevant to explain the story, like in naming Golden Order fundamentalism's goals as parallel to real-life medieval scholasticisms, I don't try to also use such things as further evidence for anything else. Such ideas are subjective, and as I can only draw conclusions from information that was objective, its counterpart, subjective information, was off my table. And yet, I included such things in that video regardless. For those among you who enjoyed or felt satisfied by those conclusions like I did, I don't think we would argue that they added to the video's value itself. Was this perhaps despite those ideas being subjective? No, because, as we see by the definitions above, the meanings that the words subjective and objective describe are that which are themselves objective properties. Accurately, what these definitions reflect are that objective does not mean good, and subjective does not mean bad. Both of these adjectives include the presupposition that the subjects they are describing already count as true. Things that subjectively exist and things that objectively exist are both, in the very literal, very exact same way, things that do exist, with no kind of asterisk or anything. Things that subjectively exist and things that objectively exist both exist. And things that subjectively don't exist and things that objectively don't exist both don't exist. As we see, what the concepts of subjective and objective describe is not if something exists or doesn't. What they describe are the conditions that would be relevant in changing something's existence. When something is objective, literally all that means is that it is something that exists physically, meaning to affect that objective thing's existence, what would be required to do so are external physical actions. As opposed to something that is subjective, which means that it is something that exists instead mentally, and that to affect that subjective thing's existence, what's required to do so are internal mental actions. And yes, mental actions here is being used to include subconscious actions like the experiencing of feelings as well. For instance, when something makes you happy or hurt, that feeling is subjective. Indeed, it's inside your mind, but the feeling itself is literally there. Because obviously it's not not there. As it is true that you are feeling that emotion, it thus evidently exists. What subjective means is just that should you eventually stop perceiving that emotion for any reason, that is the factor that actually makes it stop existing. If you're no longer feeling the sensation of happiness, you are no longer happy. Or, if you're no longer feeling the sensation of pain, you are no longer in pain. It doesn't mean such and so feeling hadn't existed earlier, or that its initial existence didn't actually count, or any other kind of extraneous bullshit like that. It just means that, right now, because your mind isn't making it exist, that makes it not exist. This is as opposed to something that is objective, where if you stop perceiving it, that is not a factor in making it stop existing. It continues to exist. And that is it. That is the entirety of the fucking difference. Objectiveness and subjectiveness are empirical properties, in the same way exactly as connected to something's value as things like mass and temperature are. And I am dead serious about hammering this point in. It is imperative to me that we check, tag, and unload any emotional baggage from these terms in order for me to properly explain by how the themes of knowledge, ideology, perception, and emotions are depicted with so much significance in this game's story. When something is called subjective, it is not a synonym for false. It isn't a synonym for insignificant. It isn't a synonym for biased, and most importantly of all, subjective is not a synonym for personal. The same as it goes with objective. It isn't a synonym for true, it isn't a synonym for more important, it isn't a synonym for neutral, and what it most certainly isn't is a synonym for has authority. Because, in regards to anything that is subjective, any kind of objective influence will always be completely and utterly arbitrary. Why? Because you cannot touch someone else's mind. Our imaginations act as if inherently separated from the real world, with the real world including the imaginations of other people other than yourself as well. Which means that the idea of anything like a will that is somehow greater than your own, that exists in some state inherently above yours, is not something that can exist. Because, for you, your will is the only thing that does exist. Since, it's subjective, and you can feel it. It doesn't exist for others, because they can't feel it, but you can, so it does. And as for an example then, of something that exists in this way, subjectively, where something like an authority can't exist, we have a fictional narrative. A story, dare I say. Like what I'm trying to tell here through the audio and video of this show, and what is itself told by the game of Elden Ring through its various sights, sounds, and interactions. With Elden Ring's fictional story being itself already imaginary, as it was first invented by its authors, it exists in the exact same circumstance of being subjective as your imagination does. It stands to reason, then, that Elden Ring's story as a whole is just as subjective as well, don't it? Now, hold on, however, some of you may be saying. What do you mean Elden Ring's story only subjectively exists? That's some story right there in the game, isn't it? And the game's existence itself is physical. So yeah, does that not make it objective? And, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not a story, that's just words. And, images and sounds. This is all just marks on a computer screen. It is nothing to me. 'Cause maybe these fancy shapes and noises appear to present a story to you through your feelings like sight and touch and hearing that you then process using your mind as what you finally observe to be existing from these ignominious abstractions. And thus, whatever in your brain right now from all that stuff exists for you. But, I can't read. And since I can't read these words, I'm not getting any story from this. I mean, like, whatever you're perceiving to be here, obviously that is what you're seeing. The facts are the facts, because you're obviously not lying. But, whatever you're getting, I ain't getting. Because, I am not observing it. My mind is not participating and allowing the imaginary world and events and characters and so on that you're otherwise referring to exist. There is a man here. He is doing something. There is a lady. She is sitting on that. That is all the information regarding this work of fiction that counts as true for me. Because my mind's perspective is not currently observing, quote unquote, the meanings of such things as words and so on, the result is those meanings themselves literally not existing for me. Because for me, in this scenario, it does not look to be true. And as it is a subjective matter that we are talking about, being a work of fiction, where you or our perspectives are not perceiving the existence of something that is imaginary in the first place, it thusly does not exist. Recalling the way how I described language to work in episode 1, the fundamental limitation of meaning as a whole is that for it to exist for more than one person, it requires the agreement, or in other words, the observation, or perception, or opinion of everyone that's involved. The idea of truth in regards to something imaginary like this is not something that is able to exist as a functional concept without also establishing the observable conditions for that truth first. Observable conditions which are themselves also subjective as to actually being significant or not in the first place. Since, at the same time, anyone is still able to mentally agree or disagree that such or so conditions are actually good, applicable ones. And finally, for an example of such a subjectively significant condition, the very one I decided myself that this series would be structured around, allowing only the content of the work itself to be usable as evidence. This is the reason why I had been yapping all this time about not holding yourself back from making shit up. There is no material difference between what is canonical and what is not, because the material in question has been immaterial from the very beginning. If you feel like what is being told here is not what you think is being told by the game's story itself, there is literally nothing that can physically differentiate from what you consider to be what's being told instead. This situation isn't like that you start with canon as the real story and then begin playing make-believe if you're unsatisfied. The situation is that playing make-believe is exactly what you've been doing since the very moment you decided to give a shit about this game's story in the first place. Fiction is already not real. As an aside, this is also the reason why I don't consider there to be any conflict between what's presented in these videos and other ideas about this game that might be incompatible with them. Like, the idea that RANNI's Great Rune is actually on the moon. Or that Radagon actually was a separate person from Marika prior to the Liurnian Wars. Because, while I am aiming to only piece together what the game itself is literally depicting in regards to its events, and then explaining those events, the premise of this goal itself actually being significant at all in the first place only exists because I agreed that it does. And if you're someone who agrees with me on that premise too, well, thank you. It makes me very happy to say so. The response to the previous installments of this show had been well beyond my expectations, and the donation some of you made towards getting me a microphone and an air purifier, and then afterwards to just supporting me in general, lies only within my wildest dreams. I hope you guys will decide to stick around as well. So, thanks. And if you're someone who disagrees with it, and regards this goal of restricting oneself solely to canon, including when it requires you to ignore plot holes, as an unsuitable method by which the topic of Elden Ring lore should be approached, the objective fact is this: you are correct. Why are you correct? Because you consider it to be unsuitable. And because you consider it that way, that means that that is true. Because that is the concept of value. So thank you, I love you, and now on, we continue. Back into the game. In our previous episode, I stated that the structure of the universe in this game's setting is dualistic, split between a body side and a mind side. By this is how the existence of free will is notably still present among the lands between its inhabitants, but with my use of the word mind, you might have been confused, as the meaning of the word mind as used in real life is not the meaning of the word mind as used in Elden Ring. Again, as with terms like ologies being switched with conspectuses, this is another case of generic fantasy word replacement. Here, the word mind switches with the word brain, and the concept we refer to when we use the word mind, i.e., consciousness, is switched with the word will. And while I still personally think the replacements of words like these are dumb, the separation here of the concept of the brain from the concept of the mind is not random. Because, while in real life, the mind and the brain are intrinsically linked, where our mind is made of material electricity, produced and processed by our physical brains, this is not the case for the creatures of Elden Ring. Their minds are made of, instead, an ethereal will, produced and processed by their metaphysical souls. With our proper understandings of the meanings behind objective and subjective now assured as well, I thus want to give a more all-encompassing description of how Elden Ring's setting is designed, along with a more succinct explanation to the actual, literary outcomes of that design. So, prepare yourselves thus for In the fictional setting of Elden Ring, there exist two distinct modes to reality. Two strategies, as it were, in accomplishing here the act of being real. That both, under inanimate circumstances, are completely and utterly untouchable to one another, and yet are both still completely and equally existent. The mode of existing in a physical way, corporeally, which I'll be calling material reality, and the mode of existing in a metaphysical way, formlessly, which I'll be calling ethereal reality. Now, about my choices of names for these, what I'm calling ethereal reality here is actually referred to directly twice in-game. In Helfen Steeple, where it is named as the Spirit World, and, of all places, the prompt for dismissing your spirit summons, where it is referred to as the Beyond. By this, then, we can perhaps call the opposite of the spirit world, the corporeal one, something along the lines of, the living world, or the here and now. In my opinion, however, names alike to these are simply too interesting as to be suitable for my goals, where I'm just laying out their literary design. So just for the purposes of my own clarity, I'll be using my made-up, much more boring names instead. Have no doubts, however, that calling ethereal reality something like non-physical or spiritual reality, or whatever else you want to call it, I ain't your mom, would still be accurate. As I fill in this graph, there will be 3-second pauses each time, so you can pause the video to read them when they come. Now, things that fall under material reality are things that exist objectively. Everything that can be considered to physically exist in any way whatsoever belong to this mode. Things that are corporeal, that have a defined form. This includes everything made of physical matter, as one might expect, but it also includes those objective forces governing how physical matter behaves, what many may call physics. Examples of these being the law of regression, as used to describe the objective process behind aging, the law of causality, as used to describe the objective process behind fate, and the forces of time and space, as used to describe the objective processes behind gravity. In real life, of course, a material existence is the only mode to reality that there is. Or, to be precise at least, all that there has currently been proven to be. In this setting, however, an alternative, ethereal mode is achievable as well. And as opposed to the objective nature that defines the materially real, things that fall under the ethereally real exist subjectively instead. Here, everything that can be considered to still exist, but not physically, are what belong to this mode. In other words, things that are formless, that do not have physical forms. And for the record, I was using the word formless way too flippantly in episode 1 on account of this. Spirits, for example, while I describe them as formless in certain contexts, if we hold ourselves to the game's own vocabulary, are not actually formless whatsoever. That is to say, in the writing of Elden Ring, the word formless is exclusively used to refer to things that exist in or from or in direct relation or whatever to ethereal reality. Souls themselves are formless, whereas specifically spirits are not formless. Because where a soul in Elden Ring is ethereal, ghosts, as we've all undoubtedly had some experience with ourselves, are material. The word non-physical could also be applicable here for describing this, but personally I would consider that to be misleading. In real life, calling something non-physical normally means that it just doesn't functionally exist. But since we're referring to things that here, yet do, the word metaphysical will be used instead. Things that exist beyond physical. With the examples for these being knowledge, emotions, and ideologies. And I'll be guessing that you won't be needing me to explain why it was these things that were chosen to not physically exist. Zooming out, what's important to note here as of right now about what I have currently laid out is that the outcome of this design, as we've so far come, is functionally indistinguishable from just, like, real life. Physical things exist physically, metaphysical things exist metaphysically. But since here, metaphysical things can't interact with physical things in the first place, they literally might as well not even exist, because it wouldn't make any difference. When things finally do get interesting, instead, is right after, where now we begin dealing with living things. With life, as one might expect, comes what we know of in-game as the power of life itself. The force of life. The essence of it. Or, as I like to think's a good name for it, simply magical energy. As we covered in episode 1, it's this fictional resource that's designed to power the entirety of Elden Ring's magic system within its setting. Because the thing that makes life so special in Elden Ring is that living things are, as we've seen so far to be exact, the only things in the universe capable of existing with both modes of reality at the exact same time. That is to say, it's this capacity precisely that is the power exclusive and inherent to all forms of life. The capacity to make the subjective and the objective interact. With the component that exists materially, being a living thing's body, referred to most often in-game as the flesh, but it's also just called the body, as I'm calling it a couple times as well, and the component that exists ethereally, being a living thing's soul, referred to in-game as, and I'm still pretty sure this is the only place it's actually specifically called out like this, so you can really imagine the kind of miracle that was for me, one's will. As a note, one's soul is also where a creature's magical energy is itself present as well, and I'll be getting into that later. For now, though, let me take a moment to zoom out of the game once more and actually explain what the fuck all this elaborate fictional bullshit is actually supposed to be doing. Just like with how the language of code is designed, acknowledging the actual, literary outcomes of this are significant to understanding them narratively as well. So, as narrative devices, this concept of a living thing's mindless body being separate from a living thing's bodiless mind frames in a very specific way how you, the reader, yourself exists. In other words, what this does here is the drawing of a line between our consciousness and our unconsciousness. Our appearance, our nervous system, our heartbeat, breathing, digestion, our pupils dilating, and everything else our body accomplishes that makes us, us, and has no direct relationship to our thoughts. They are things that are obviously fundamental for our continued existences as ourselves, and which don't require our attention or observation in any way to fulfill that role. This is made into our unconscious self. Contrasting, our memories, our reasoning, communication, things like trust, prediction, feelings, decisions, and everything else our mind accomplishes that makes us, us, and has no direct relationship to keeping us alive. This is made into the conscious, including subconscious, self. These are things that are also, obviously, fundamental for our continued existences, also as ourselves, but as proven by whenever we're asleep, they are not required for us to continue physically. In summary, the appearance of this seeming active separation between our real-life bodies and our real-life minds is what this narrative concept actually serves to depict. How we exist in the universe physically, and how we exist in the universe mentally. With it laid out like this now, you might have already noticed that, by Elden Ring's universe being designed in this way, a very bright specialness is then made, shining like a limelight onto the fact that, despite this very real separation, our bodies and our minds do interact. The thing represented by, now, and after all the work I've done, I believe I can say this with confidence, shall be revealed. The most narratively significant element of Elden Ring's story. The power of life. That which is the existence of matter on account of thought, and the existence of thought on account of matter. In other words, the interacting itself between our material bodies and our ethereal minds. Wham! 10 seconds this time. Just like that. And to return to how the premise of magical energy specifically fits into all this, what that simply is the attaching of this plot device, the concept itself of the power of life, onto a singular, thingy. So it can then be, from an authorial perspective, more diversely able to be fucked around with by the in-universe characters. Just to reconfirm as well, the existence of this power is something that's legitimately 100% innate to the universe of this setting. All of life has it, period. Even, so it appears, microscopic life. But before we finally continue with the rest of the video, there is one thing that I believe is of single most importance to specify. What I'm referring to here with material reality and ethereal reality are very specifically not alternate dimensions. As in, this is not like a two sides of a single coin situation. Because of the distinction here that objective forces are shown to just not be uniformly applicable to ethereal reality, what's necessarily going on is specifically more like a 3D glasses situation. Okay, it's like alright, it's like this. In real life, pretend this, in real life, the universe is effectively blue. Reality is blue. The only way for something to exist is to be blue, and as such, it ends up that all things that do exist are blue. And that's it. It's just blue. Everything is blue. All day and all night and everything we see is just blue, like this, inside and outside. And blue here represents material reality, an objective existence. Now, we compare this to the setting of Elden Ring, where instead of just blue, the universe is magenta. For, in Elden Ring's paradigm, there are instead two ways for something to exist. Being blue, or being red, with red here representing ethereal reality, a subjective existence. Because existence itself, or in other words, the phenomenon when something is being real, it isn't a place where something is. It's a thing that something does. With the reason it's worth specifying all this being because of how this whole ethereal mode of existence plot device thing ultimately gets used. Space-time, entropy, and, although it's not an objective law for us, the principle of cause and effect are, prominently, things that physically exist. They don't non-physically exist. And so, for things that are something other than physical, concepts like location, age, and results that relate to those objective forces aren't automatically applicable to them, like they are automatically applicable to us. And so, from the perspective of things that materially exist, ethereal things can appear to be like omnipresent, or immortal, or in defiance of linear time. And even though things look like this, like they're bending and breaking the laws of physics to follow their personal whims, the in-universe truth of the matter is that it's functionally just a coincidence. It's not that a physical you is here, and a metaphysical they is elsewhere. It's that you're both in the same space, but in the universe of this story, being in the same space has two available rule sets. For you, on this world of the living, 1 equals A plus B plus C, while for them, beyond that world, 1 can just equal A, or B, or C, or just B plus C, or just whatever, because, you know, it's the imagination. No limits. These all just being theoretical examples, though, of course. We don't actually know the specifics of how ethereal reality is supposed to function prior to getting all magicked up beforehand. At least, not yet. So, naming the basics of their interactions from what can be currently observed is the best I can do for now. At the end of it all, material reality and ethereal reality. Different conditions, same result. Existing as an object, existing as a subject. In fact, it's this very principle that's behind the corporeal forms of our friend RANNI's being depicted the way they are as well. RANNI, as we know, exists as the technically still alive, merely disembodied soul of an ex-Empyrean with very observable trust issues. And I am not kidding, by the way. Reread her dialogue, and it is almost palpable just how much this woman's parents are divorced. In other words, RANNI is a person who is currently existing exclusively ethereally. And for the state of ethereal reality, where there are no objective gravitational forces, the concept of location doesn't count for her. And since, for the formless RANNI, location doesn't exist, this is how the existence we see across RANNI's 3 physical bodies is ultimately accomplished. Specifically, the normal-sized doll we most often see her with, the unborn reincarnation of her original body within the amber egg that she uses for the second phase of the Rennala boss fight, and her phone, that we find in Ainsel River after delivering to her the Fingerslayer blade. You forgive me for stealing your phone, right, RANNI? Like, you're not still mad? RANNI? With note given to these 3 corporeal forms being specially compatible with RANNI's soul in the first place. Her doll and her phone being artificial bodies, specifically built for RANNI to use, and the body within the amber egg being literally hers biologically. It's by RANNI's current being, as a purely subjective creature, objectively omnipresent, that we see her able to take control of any of these bodies when and wherever she wants. As I say this, however, I'm sure you are recalling the main apparent difference seen between RANNI controlling her dolls and RANNI controlling the amber egg. For RANNI's doll and phone, the visual effect on them when being apparently used by her is of RANNI's, soul's face. The face of her original body sticking out of their heads like a mirrored ghost's. Compared to what we see when the amber egg is being used, even as RANNI is literally proclaiming herself as she does, whatever she's doing. No apparent visual like this is shown. Where this disparity comes from is as a result of what, precisely, for RANNI, makes her doll and her phone, and the amber egg from which she was born, meaningfully different. RANNI's connection to the amber egg, or rather, the body of the unborn demigod within the amber egg, where the great rune we get it is from, is biological. In other words, for RANNI, it's natural. Let me put it like this. From the moment of RANNI's birth to her suicide, the Crown Princess of Caria existed as an ordinary living thing, with both a physical body and a metaphysical soul. And by the evidently natural connection between the bodies and souls of the majority of living things, such 2 components of any single organism are inherently capable of interacting with each other. After her suicide, however, RANNI's body exclusively dies. Her soul becomes disembodied, and from there on, RANNI exists only as a metaphysical entity. After Rennala began using the amber egg, however, attempting through it the art of reincarnation, RANNI's singularly, solely dead body is just brought back. And since, it's legit RANNI's original body that's been brought back, this is real deal reincarnation after all, the natural connection by which RANNI's original body and soul originally interacted with each other is also back. By the making use of this original of her connections between the body she was born with and the soul she was born with is how RANNI ultimately takes control of the amber egg as we see in Rennala's boss fight. And it's subsequently why, when she does so, we also don't see anything. Functionally, RANNI using the amber egg is her becoming an ordinary living thing again. See? A material body with an ethereal soul. And for the same reason we can't see this guy's soul, or this person's, or this thing's, or most every living thing's on the planet, controlling their bodies, we also don't see RANNI's soul when she's controlling the amber egg. Her soul isn't physically there, and as such it isn't visible, in direct contrast to when she's controlling her dolls instead. The dolls, of course, are bodies that are artificial, and, being artificial, they have no kinda automatic magical connection to RANNI's soul like her original body does. So really, one might say, RANNI shouldn't have any more capacity to interact with her dolls as she does anything else. And yet, evidently, RANNI does. And it's the method by which she does so that's actually being presented by this unique visual of her ghost face hanging out reflected from her doll's face, while she's so seeming inhabiting it. When RANNI makes use of a doll, what she does in order to accomplish this is the magical materialization of her soul first, as to then be able to interact with the otherwise completely unrelated objects of her artificial bodies. In exactly the same way, one might notice, the likes of our summons from Spirit Ashes have their souls materialized, so that, from there, they can also interact with otherwise completely unrelated objects to them. A materialized soul, hence a visible one, using a material body. To put it simply, RANNI is basically spirit calling herself. although in perhaps a much more precise fashion than the means our spirit calling bell allows us to accomplish. Nonetheless, through the shape of a physical ghost instead of a metaphysical soul is how she's able to interact with the also physical bodies of the dolls. Physically. We can consider the ultimate product of RANNI's playing with dolls equivalent in purposes to something like Selen's inhabiting of a half-living, soulless body, with her materialized, half-living, bodiless soul, producing, as we observe ourselves, a new Selen that's just fully alive. By this, Selen is able to surpass the mortal limitations she'd been kept to by the original body she was born in. And RANNI, with her also materialized, bodiless living soul, also takes over a soulless living body, if just an artificial one. With RANNI and Selen's evident differences being the result of the realities of those souls themselves. Most prominently, the visual of RANNI's mirrored ghost face, and RANNI's evident inability to be properly killed. The first of which being something that is otherwise completely unique from every other instance of soulfuckery that we see in the game. And the second of which being something that is actually shared with every single one of our spirit summons. Because what RANNI's doing specifically is rather than, materializing the entirety of her soul into a singular object, and inserting it into a body to then drive it like a mech, as Selen does, which of course results with Selen still being physically killable, as opposed to RANNI, who isn't, what RANNI does instead is merely the materializing of a projection of her soul instead. And by this, instead of controlling a body directly, she controls it remotely. Like one of those surgical arm machines. And it's this unique remote control-like situation of hers in particular that's what's actually being depicted with the mirrored ghost face in RANNI's character design. You see, she's not actually in it, because if she was in it, then we wouldn't see her ghost face hang outside of it, because it'd be inside of it. But it's not inside of it because she isn't. She's behind it, outside of it, maybe even meta side of it. And as a reflection of RANNI's spirit, not being dependent, as it were, to a single place at any given time, like other forms of ghost making in the game involve, because of her unique accomplishment of existence, she, whether in the egg, her doll, or her phone, is just talking through it. Like a Muppet. Hence, the reason we don't see anything even appearing similar to how RANNI appears anywhere else in the game. RANNI's using her dolls, that she does in order for her to continue interacting directly with the material world, including after the destruction of the Elden Ring itself, are legitimately unique, because RANNI herself is unique. Her unique form is what allows RANNI to be physically unkillable, as well as Selvis's Amber Draft failing to affect her. It's like if you tried to harm someone by attacking, or drugging their laptop. You hurt their feelings, sure, which I guess appropriately is exactly all that is accomplished when we do such things. But the person themselves, obviously, isn't actually influenced in any direct way. The natural innate connection between someone's physical body and metaphysical will that other victims of the puppet-making potions get exploited by into having their free will taken away doesn't apply for RANNI. The doll isn't actually RANNI's body. It has no natural connection to her soul for Selvis's fate controlling potions to otherwise exploit and actually control her mind through. We'll recall, as Selvis had evidently somehow failed in making note of himself, the freeing of her mind from the physical circumstance of her body is exactly what RANNI had already accomplished when she killed herself in the first place. Across the lands between, it isn't ever RANNI herself that's physically being interacted with. It really is just a doll. RANNI isn't physically real. In fact, it wouldn't be inaccurate to consider Ranni's dolls, say, material envoys to her ethereal will. With her being able to put on or take off, as it were, any of her corporeal forms without any particular inconveniences. For Ranni, the using of a material body is like the putting on of a glove, or even, perhaps, the sticking of your head through a window. You see what I'm saying? This is how, for the seemingly empty phone after killing the baleful shadow, and seemingly empty doll after Ranni uses it to kill her two fingers, remain both under her control and able to notice their surroundings as well. For her doll, with how she's able to notice you putting the Dark Moon ring on its finger, before seemingly zooping the doll out, putting its clothes back on, and then zooping it back in. Why on earth does she do this, by the way? And for her phone, where, despite its being explained as feeling like an empty husk in its description, Ranni has no trouble still chatting through it should you rest at Ranni's rise, with afterwards the phone still seeming just as empty and unresponsive, even though, evidently, it is responsive. Again, with our main menu's narrator being written to follow the style of it never actually being wrong, the description we're given for Ranni's phone, and subsequently her doll, since they're just different sized models of each other, remain technically correct. Because it isn't that Ranni isn't here, it's that Ranni physically isn't here. Feeling now like an empty husk. Objectively speaking, indeed, the narrator is absolutely correct. Ranni straight up stops existing. But in Elden Ring setting, where the universe isn't blue, but magenta, the reality of it really is just Ranni, in a sense, picking her phone up, hence making it feel like she is there, and then putting her phone down, making it feel like she isn't. With the deal being, of course, that whether she actually is or not, being completely unrelated with how Ranni's dolls objectively appear. As examples like the conversation at Ranni's Rise show us, the likes of, voice calls only are still able to be made, even when the phone itself looks otherwise completely inactive. For situations like that, it's like Ranni using the phone only so far as to project her voice, and just nothing else. And so, materially speaking, the result is basically like there's literally no way of noticing if Ranni actually is tuned in or not, outside of if she wants you to notice, like when we first pick up her phone in Ainsel River. Cause if she just did something like turn on only its ability to take in sights, sounds, and touch without turning on anything else, like the ability to respond to such stimuli, for example, it'd still seem physically as if she wasn't in there at all, even though, in magenta, she really is. Or, isn't. In this case, our eyes would be blue, with the changes having occurred being exclusively red, consequently making it so it's impossible to tell if she is here or actually isn't here. Right, Ranni? This premise I've gone over, of ethereal reality making it so that the concept of location doesn't necessarily exist, is also why teleportation, as depicted in the world of Elden Ring, works the ways we see it does as well. And by that, I mean it's why teleportation gets depicted unilaterally as involving the physical setting up of a place beforehand, to actually then use teleportation to go there. Magical teleportation involves, through an evidently myriad methods of spellcraft, turning one's own body temporarily ethereal, thus making it so location stops objectively existing for you, and thus functionally omnipresent. And then turning yourself material again, but just somewhere else than where you first began. Now, You might have guessed that it's this seeming omnipresence from when something's ethereal that makes it possible for one to just ignore the physical distance between the position you came from and the position you got to. And you'd have done well to guess that, because it's correct. But it's this very same appearance of omnipresence from ethereal reality that makes it impossible to actually just teleport wherever you want. As we see with our two clearest instances of teleporting's limitations. Melina, a teleporting ghost, is yet unable to teleport directly into Leyndell, where she wants to go. Instead, she needs us, the main character, to go to Leyndell ourselves so she could follow us. And RANNI, a teleporting ghost, is yet unable to teleport directly into Nokron to get the Fingerslayer blade. Instead, she hires us, the main character, to pick it up at Nokron ourselves so we can give it to her. The reason behind teleportations in Elden Ring always seeming to share this limitation is that, while metaphysical, where the concept of distance doesn't exist, and so one place is the same as every other place, it also means that the concept of distance doesn't exist, and so one place is the same as every other place. It's a real ticket to nowhere situation. And it's this that's why I've been so specific about phrasing omnipresence as just what it looks like, rather than what it actually is. Along with how I'm able to tell you that ethereal reality and material reality in this setting aren't just like two alternate dimensions, upon someone etherealizing, no matter what they then subjectively do in that metaphysical state, the physical distance they'll have crossed upon rematerializing is automatically zeroed. Where subjective things and objective things don't interact, while nothing can be done to you when you're existing ethereally, you can't do anything either. And so, the only way to actually make this guaranteed zeroing phenomenon useful is to physically prepare the destination itself first, so that in some mumbo-jumbo magical way or another, you're able to somehow still distinguish those physical coordinates while you're ethereal, and thus simply choose to specifically materialize there. And so, while ethereally, any 2 points are, from one's metaphysical perspective, exactly the same, and here's that seeming omnipresence again, only from material reality are the differences able to be readily appreciated. Besides the two examples I mentioned earlier, for my favorite showing of this requirement, that, while perhaps not the clearest, is, as a bonus for me, definitely the funniest, are Mohg's blood portals. The ones used by him, but more commonly as we see, used by his blood nobles. As we see over the course of the game, all teleporting accomplished by Mohg's blood powers are precipitated by the appearing of physical pools of blood first. It's no coincidence that every location we do deal with enemies using blood teleportation, then, is specifically on their turf. And hence, for everywhere else in the lands between, where there is not the magical medium of Mohg's blood already at that location, we don't see them teleport. Because they can't. When we see this kind of thing happen, in-universe, it isn't Mohg's accursed blood that's being made. It's Mohg's accursed blood that's making them. Literally, yes. Every single one of Mohg's blood nobles that we see that uses this fucking dramatic-ass slow rise from a pool of blood as their entrance before fighting us had to walk there first to put the blood there so that they could do this stupid entrance ceremony for us. Oh my god, it's so funny. Oh my god, Mohg fucking sucks, man. He's the best. Like, he's the fucking man, okay? He's the best. I love Mohg. That's the real point of this segment. Forget everything else. He's the best demigod in the game. Go to Gideon's desk, completely toked out, like, ooh, that fucked up Lord of Blood, turning all our tarnish into bloody fingers. What an asshole. Yeah, man. Anyway, it's these narrative elements that are also the same things behind the Tarnished being able to teleport between, for us as players, our unlocked checkpoints, and as in-universe characters, places like the Chapel of Anticipation, after just previously being dead, and into and out of the Round Table Hold, a place that is just magically completely inaccessible from the rest of the world. As mentioned before, this is why Melina, a teleporting ghost, was incapable of just going into Leyndell by herself, requiring our help to do so, going there physically first. And it's how the ghosts of the sisters Aurelia and Aureliette had to find each other physically first, before actually being able to explore the stars together in the beyond. Subsequently, teleporting working like this is also why the magic of the Two Fingers related Golden Order aligned teleportation, as we see used by Morgott, and perhaps we can consider the teleporting performed by Radagon as a part of this as well, don't appear to have such a restrictive material requirement as the likes of Mohg's blood powers do. Under the Erd Tree's purview, the entire continent of the Lands Between can be considered to already count as prepared turf for the magic of the Golden Order's teleportation. Thus the ease by which we're able to be harassed by King Morgott the Grace Given. Second to last, for the sake of posterity, although I personally consider this to be, with certainty, outcome from legit real-life coincidence. From a purely fictional perspective, this is also how the checkpoint in Placidusax's arena takes us, temporally, just as well as spatially, to that exact point in the past space and time, when we teleport there as well. Since time and space are merely two halves of the same thing, gravitational forces in general, from ethereal reality, they're both just as equally nulled. And finally, if there had to be something that did so, these elements in the story can also serve to explain the in-universe mechanics behind the usage of our multiplayer items. Combining with the earlier established unilateral prepared turfedness of the Lands Between for the powers of code, as Morgott and the collecting of runes from killed enemies so benefit from, the sudden appearing of such apparitions, in summons and invasions, can be explained to in-universe be your Tarnished flying across time and space from their location, at the time that they got summoned, to the location of their host of fingers. And when we finally come back, we're simply where, and when, we originally came from. Return to our world, indeed, perhaps, simply our present. And now without another bloody finger, as I'm sure Euro would agree. To address how the other two explicit objective forces we know of are twisted with ethereal reality as well, fate, as we've gone over, as shown by the canonical existence of free will, doesn't count for things that are ethereally real. And finally, regression doesn't count for ethereal existences either. Hence, examples like RANNI being unkillable for existing as a disembodied soul. The Tarnished able to be repeatedly brought back to life for as long as they retain their memory of grace, and Roderica's referring to the souls of those who are able to call forth infinitely as spirits as their immortal essences. Not immortal in the sense that they are alive, because they're obviously not alive, they're all guys who died, but immortal in the sense that they're eternal. Aging doesn't exist for them because souls exist only ethereally, and the forces described with the law of regression, where the phenomenon known as dying actually comes from, only applies objectively to things that exist materially. Since, of course, after enough time passing, really, what's the difference between life and death then? Eternal. Yeah. Like America was supposed to be, but wasn't actually. Since she was something that still, well, physically existed, even though the rules prescribed by the Golden Order was stopping things from directly dying, what it could not stop was the existence of aging itself. After all, the universe as a whole is a lot bigger than just one Erdtree's magic can reach, maybe even than a few dozens or hundreds of Erdtrees. So you can bet that as long as the universe itself is continuing to exist the way it currently is, that universal constant of aging to inevitably end us all ain't going nowhere anytime soon. As you might have also come to notice, for me, I've been having to avoid more and more ordinary fucking words overlapping with the game like this as this show's continued. It makes me want to blow my fucking brains out. In any case, the power of life being what makes possible for a living thing's ethereal soul and material body to interact, and magical energy, the fictional resource this power is made to come from, being exclusively contained within living things' souls, is also why we see the word soulless being shown interchangeable with the word dead in this game. A body without its soul, that is to say, without access to its original, literal life force, tends to be what one would identify as a corpse. Accurately too, to be sure, but it's this that's also why we see Godwyn, the Prince of Death, referred to consistently as if he's a totally different person now as compared to when he was alive, Godwyn the Golden. As well as why those who live in death are considered to be so freaky, where other forms of the undead, like, say, us Tarnished for one, the undead nobles we find around the place for another, the Gargles for a third, the Mausoleum Soldiers, fourth, and that still doesn't cover all of them either, aren't. So what's the big deal? Well, as we know, on the Night of Black Knives, the soul of Godwyn the Golden died. His mind, the mental existence of this person, that identity of Godwyn the Golden, is wiped off the face of the earth. But the body itself, that once belonged to our now late Godwyn the Golden, is still active. A fleshly body without a soul? Indeed, a very literal living corpse. And so, sorta like if you had a Word document, deleted everything from it, and then wrote in it again, that's why he's special. Friend of Dread Fortisax, Lord Brother, Godwyn the Golden, is gone. Scion of the Golden Bough, yet first of the demigods to die. What we find left is now simply a different guy. Godwyn, the Prince of Death. Rest in fucking pieces, right? As it stands, the way the power of life works fundamentally in Elden Ring is also by how the likes of runes are made to work in-universe. As explained in episode 1, code, the formless language of light that the Elden Ring itself is also made out of, exists as a form of, effectively, objective meaning. And by this, it's able to be used to independently create magical effects without any of the mental requirements compared to performing ordinary magic, other than, specifically, that user of code knowing which words they'd want to use to, in essence, describe the effect they want to create. Hence-wise, Melina tells you to talk about yourself when leveling up. Why the big boss items we get are called memorials. Why Enya, Melina, and you all have no issues whatsoever continuing to use code to do stuff, regardless of whatever the circumstances are themselves, and so on, and so on. The rest is still as described in episode 1, but it's through the letters themselves, that is to say, the runes, of code being infused with the power of life, that this outcome is actually, in the story, created. Of, as one might call it, solidified thought, also known as words. Just with that bit of extra magic. Accounting for this is why in episode 1 I related code to a computer as well, where you could say complex, infinitely variable, subjective mental actions are the kind accomplished using electricity by our brains. Basic, direct, and without any room for interpretation, objective mental actions would be the kind accomplished using electricity by computers. It's the exact same here. But just for the sake of the record, the way the word code is actually used in this story, literarily, is as it relates to systems like law and religious practice. The word code here just means rules. Like it does in the organization of government, and like it does with religious obligation. The actual word order, just as well in this story, fundamentally just means, like, giving orders. The telling of people what to do, and designating of how things should be. Like as seen with how laws can be enforced, and like as seen with how beliefs can be enforced. All that is, just to confirm, yes, Elden Ring's story is not literally about computers. That the power of life is defined as, explicitly, an ability that is inherent to things that are alive, and the universe of Elden Ring itself being one bound to determinism, also proves the reasons behind our being told things like that runes themselves are alive as well. Being imbued with magical energy, allowing the language of code to perform magic independently, as deterministically necessitated, runes convergently become a totally living thing altogether. As it's solely the power of, definitively, being alive that makes magic possible, it can only be described that anything that can make magic, therefore, is alive. And it's this same principle that's behind what makes Crystallians unique as well. The definition of alive we see the Crystallians with isn't attached to their bodies. In fact, it isn't even attached to their intelligence. As we're told, the Crystallians themselves aren't even that smart. Where their definition of living comes from instead is from their capacity to directly harness the power of life, by themselves. That is to say, the reason the Crystallians are alive is because they can cast their own spells. Just like with runes, despite being inorganic, and despite being artificial, they also literally have life. And since they have life, which, to recall, is explicitly a natural, objective, unanimous thing innate to life, it thus means that they are, necessarily, living. This also is what's referred to when it's said that the Crystallians are considered to exist near the ideals of whatever the exact subject is that the conspectus of the primeval current is trying to understand and replicate. We're able to see this by looking upon the Graven Mages and noting the similarities they share with the Crystallians. The Graven Mages, it can be said, are also literally inorganic. As shown by the transformations Azur and Lasat go through, the body bits of the sorcerers to make up each Graven Mage becomes crystallized. Nonetheless, Graven Mages are able to directly harness the power of life too, casting spells of their own just as much as the Crystallians do. The Graven Mages are obviously much shittier at doing this than the Crystallians are, but the fact that they're still both doing, like, the same thing shows us what precisely about the Crystallians is so special that makes the Rylocarians shit their pants over them. That other forms of inorganic life, like the marionettes, who, just to confirm, do have souls, so they definitely do count as also alive, evidently lack. As it were, the likes of losers like these are only capable of indirectly using the power of life, in some way or another unable to cast their own original spells. And so, they aren't as legit as the Crystallians are, and the Graven Mages are trying to be. Now, as to whether or not this additionally means I might have also actually managed to figure out what the fucking primeval current is, accidentally, just through the process of writing the script, Maybe. Fucking, that'd be a real kick in the head, wouldn't it? So, keep a tab on this as a bet too, for when the DLC comes around. Right next to my bet from episode 1 about Mikla's original hair color. Something, abiogenesis. To see if I was barking up the wrong tree or not. Aren't you excited to find out too? As an aside, it also turns out that upon looking closer at Reichardt's paintings of Volcano Manor, with preferably a more neutral colored torch to contradict the establishment's current lighting choices, it almost appears surely that the Lord of Blasphemy himself is actually a natural blonde. I feel like I'm starting to understand Tanith's looks on things, if you're starting to get my meaning. If it isn't just my eyes playing tricks on me, if there was something, that might be a reason for me to be scared about my bet regarding the color of Mikla's hair. Still, let's hope. And finally, to end this segment about the powers of life by being a little frank, this narrative conceit, like this plot device, of Elden Ring's magic system, including, effectively, being capable of the process of thinking, of learning, of doing things on purpose, is literally magic, and completely and utterly unique to the act of being alive. It's a very evocative thing, isn't it? You can swish this kind of notion around your head any which ways, upon any real-life scenario, and, as it would seem to have been designed for, what exists in the story of Elden Ring as the magical power of life itself will match its description. Like what's going on right now, for example. You listening to my voice, looking at a computer screen, vibrations are taken in by your ears, photons are taken in by your eyes, and not only are they then converted into electricity and sent to the brain, but there is an entire, completely imaginary system of language and recognition, of meanings and implications, and the interactions between them and everything, that makes what they are otherwise, physically, just teeny tiny jolts between a million billion neurons, something else entirely. Something even beyond physically, but nonetheless, indisputably, literally still there. Calling it magical is a sentiment, I find at least, to be really very sweet. Okay, so, as it would turn out, something that I had not known during the production of episode 1 of this show was that the removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, as told to us by Enya, the creating of the Golden Order itself, was actually a relatively recent event. 'Cause, while I had figured out the currently apparent in-universe motives behind the removing of the Rune of Death, what the Rune of Death is physically, and what the term Destiny Death itself actually means, back when I had first begun this project, what I had failed to recognize correctly was when the removal of the Rune of Death had actually been done. Along with the presence of the Rune of Death within the Elden Ring being also what made the distinction between the Age of the Erdtree, or the Age of Plenty, when Godfrey was king, and the Age of the Golden Order, when Radagon was king. This is why some statements, such as Marika's speech at the Grand Lift of Dectus and the protection of the Erdtree, name drop explicitly capital O Order, meaning specifically the Elden Ring's order, but without actually saying Golden Order. The Golden Order simply hadn't been created yet at that time. This being why, of course, as recounted in several items, the Erdtree underwent its natural senescent death, as referenced by things like the Blessed Dew Talisman and the Lord's Divine Fortification, that triggered the natural releasing of the seeds to sprout the minor Erdtrees, ending the Age of Plenty, marked as special because it was from when the Erdtree's blood was still flowing, and as referred to directly as inherently inevitable in Erdtree Heal. To which, directly in response, as we see from America's press conference at the Minor Erdtree Church, Golden Order fundamentalism, the worshipping of the Golden Order, and thus concurrently the Golden Order itself, were created. Explaining why items like the Erdtree Seal and Sacred Tears tell us that Erdtree worship is now out of practice. To the legitimate extent, it would seem, since we find the Erdtree Seal on a corpse in a cell in Prison Town on Mount Gelmir, that under Radagon's rule, Erdtree worship was made straight up fucking illegal. Similarly to, of note, when the powers of the ancient Erdtree incantation using Crucible Knights were made scorned, after the Age of Godfrey, to whom they served. Or, in other words, during the Age of Radagon, of the Golden Order. For the likes of yours truly, this revelation and how the Age of the Erdtree and the Age of the Golden Order are separate also explains why situations like the Grand Lift of Rolds exists. As such an incredible monument of large-scale infrastructure, in a place called the Forbidden Lands, to a region we're told is forbidden. Recalling the ethnicity referenced by the Northerner preset in the character creator, the presence of Zamorians and Altus in the Weeping Peninsula, and reference to the mountainside Kaiden home settlement that all the Kaiden sellswords traveled from, to Limgrave. If it's supposed to be illegal for anyone to be in the Forbidden Lands, how could these people have ever left the mountaintops of the Giants in the first place? Why hath such a massive elevator been built to transport to and from a location that the only major activity we hear about explicitly for this place was a single war, where the only other grand lift we know to exist is Dectus, built to obviously accommodate the would-be very heavy traffic between the highways of Liurnia and Altus to Leyndell? Who the hell were these two churches America built for? So as to worship before an idol of Queen America? A woman who was right fucking there? Who were these people, presumably not the same people being led into battle by America herself, that these churches were built to accommodate? Were there civilians up here? In the forbidden giant mountaintops? Questions like these were what continually assailed me, until I remembered the words of a comrade, who happened to have recognized this a million years before I did. Perhaps serves me right. Because the answer was actually just that the mountaintops hadn't always been forbidden. After the Erdtree's natural death and the end of the Age of Godfrey, when he and the Tarnished were created, and Radagon's epic divorce, where he then became the second Elden Lord, and the Knight of Black Knives, when Godwyn the Golden was assassinated, and then, after the creation of the Golden Order, among similar events like the banning of blood sports and Erdtree worship itself, the mountaintops of the Giants got sealed off, with the route from it to Altus becoming the Forbidden Lands we know so well today. So basically right now the timeline is this. With that mistake fixed then, of when the Rune of Death had actually been removed from the Elden Ring, it would be good now to actually explain what the Rune of Death did before it was removed, as something that I had legitimately just completely forgot to put in episode 1. Besides how it gets used by us to get to the final boss. As luck would have it though, establishing exactly what fate is beforehand makes this topic a lot easier to explain than it otherwise would have been. To start, the Rune of Death is not the device determining whether or not death itself actually exists in the Lands Between, as we see by the forces of Mariga's empire establishing its rule by explicitly killing everyone that didn't submit. And as shown to us just as blatantly from what we see in the game itself, nobody was having any trouble dying or being killed in the Lands Between while the Rune of Death itself was still confined within Malekith. The encroachment of death being, also explicitly, an objective fact for all living things, underlies all this as well. Physically, death simply cannot be stopped. At best, it can be forestalled, the same way ultimately as eating and sleeping can forestall it. But eventually, it will come around. There is the idea that, by Marika's removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, the concept of death itself was removed from the Lands Between entirely, effectively making everyone on the continent immortal, or some such as along those lines. But this is a misreading, and comes from a misunderstanding of how literal the concept of fate in Elden Ring's world is, as well as what the runes making up the Elden Ring themselves actually are narratively. As exemplified with the Mending Runes, their in-universe functions are akin to, accurately, being the laws of a constitution, with the codifying of a new constitution being, as you've perhaps already realized, the establishing of a new government, that we, as the new Elden Lord, are made literally the monarch of. The Mending Rune of the Death Prince, for example, whose laws are, as described, life within death, is akin here to a proposed amendment towards a constitution, a minor change intended to improve the current legislation in some specific way, without doing something like destroying that original constitution entirely, to establish a wholly new system of governance instead. The adding of a function to a set of laws that had not previously been there, using the Rune of the Death Prince when we rebuild the Elden Ring, is thus the adoption of such an amendment into that government's code, with life within death now enforced. Written down, as some may say, it's not illegal anymore, no longer heresy, and no longer to be stamped out for existing outside of the Elden Ring's official rules. Precisely the opposite of what's accomplished with the Mending Runes is what was done with the Rune of Death instead. The removal of a function from a constitution that previously had been there. So then, what exactly was this function? What did the Rune of Death do? Knowing what fate is now, however, when we recall the Rune of Death's secondary name, as Enya tells us, the rules described by that rune become instantly clear. Destined death. Or, in other words, guaranteed death. On the creation of the Golden Order, Marika removed the words for guaranteed death from the Elden Ring. Hence,
I have long observed the lands between. This world is in dire need of repair, and death indiscriminate. Are you prepared to commit a cardinal sin?
death guaranteed for everybody. Queen Marika, as we're told, was a god that should have lived a life eternal. Where the should is coming from here is because the vision to which she is vessel for, as the god of that magical edict, the Elden Ring, was of an ideology, a system of ideas, that didn't include the description of things being guaranteed to eventually die in it. Marika should not have died. Which she does, because we did it. To lay it out more thematically, the Golden Order wasn't made, as it perhaps rather be framed, on an empowering of life. The Golden Order was made instead in a refusing of death, and refusal is the word I believe to be most accurate here. Items like the Lord's Divine Fortification, the Avatar Staff, and the Golden Seeds explain to us explicitly that for a long while, the Erdtree has just been legit fucking dead. The apparent second generation of the Erdtree's progeny, the golden saplings produced by these golden seeds, are referred to as illusory. And looking upon the inner wood of the Erdtree itself, beneath its golden shell, is visibly rotted. Additionally, from certain spots in the map, like in Liurnia, when we look upon the Erdtree itself, it's outright translucent. This vision of the Erdtree still standing tall, such an image as if it actually was immune to the objective forces of its universe, epic, awesome, eternal, and so on, as its worshippers would have you believe, is literally a hologram. It's made of light. For as shown by the variants of the Elden Lord ending, the outward appearance, specifically, of the Erdtree, is as directly produced from the order of the Elden Ring. All at once, the Erdtree, that is to say, is a billboard. While the color beneath that magical shell, up close, fails to hide the fact that the wood is decomposing. Such is, of course, all life. As recounted in Episode 1, this is why the effects of grace, the direct enchantment of blood by the Elden Ring's order, included the appearance of immortality as one of its effects, even though, especially for those like the Wandering Nobles discovered, it wasn't actually as glamorous as it was perhaps cracked up to be. It's almost like a sick joke, truth be told, something seemingly among only the destitute and the abandoned to have ever inspired any doubt. If the vision behind the magic, enforcing its will upon your body, excluded the concept that you'd be guaranteed to eventually die in it, next to all the other pumping up with life force stuff held within the letters of code that you've just been infused with, then yeah, you'll be okay. Alive, if nothing else, as we will see. Where the life-giving power of the rest of the Eritree's blessings included the continual restoring of one's HP, making that person invincible, what the presence of the Rune of Death had done was the literal marking of a point where that magical empowerment would eventually turn off by itself. It being, after all, the principle of death being destined. What Marika had accomplished in the confining of the Rune of Death, what could accurately also be called things like the words of death or the terms of death, was, very functionally, the removal of this idea that a living thing would have a guaranteed shutdown from the Elden Ring scripture. No more afterwards would those blessed by the now Golden Order be inherently destined to die, up to and including, as seemingly intended, the very Erdtree itself. On Earth, and elsewhere, the power upon which their HP constantly returned to max would never ever end, and thus, definitely totally, gonna last forever. Because that's how energy works. But if I were to keep going from here, I'd just be repeating the rest from episode 1 as well. So just, insert this section into your memory of the sequence about grace from the first episode for me instead. In any case, that's why using the Rune of Death was singularly required to break the invincibility of the Erdtree's thorns. You return the code describing guaranteed death back into the partly destroyed Elden Ring. And thus, this deliberately intended to inspire total worship of image of immortality, magically made real by that Elden Ring, that was keeping the actual fire that is physically put there from actually destroying anything, gets dispelled. This is where the difference in world states between before you beat Malekith and after you beat him actually comes from in-universe. The Erdtree is being set on fire here, but since it still has its effect of, essentially, infinite HP regen, it's not a big deal. When afterwards, we then get the Rune of Death back from Malekith and fling it into Marika, the reason we had to go and do that is because it's the only thing capable of us using to force that regen to finally end. With the projected image of immortality thus dispelled, nothing is left to continue holding the Erdtree. Or perhaps, more accurately, that gold-painted icon the Erdtree was made into, together. And the rest I'm sure you know. Oh, and the actual meaning of, like the term itself, destined death, is also why Melina speaks this phrase against us if she's still alive after the Lord of Chaos ending. It doesn't have anything to do with the Rune of Death itself, as by this point, since the Elden Ring has just been destroyed, the Rune of Death obviously doesn't exist anymore either. Her using of that expression is just her saying that, with us as the Lord of Chaos, our death is now guaranteed ourselves, because she's the one coming to collect. And with the sounds of chaos in our minds, my final correction for episode 1 is to fix what was definitely the gravest error I had made. And such that, now, I feel really dumb for not having realized it from the start, despite all the information staring me in the face the entire time. That is to say, my misrepresenting of the nature of the Flame of Frenzy. As, very obviously reflected by the fact that every Flame of Frenzy spell solely requires faith, meaning it's a concept that, in its entirety, is dependent on the creature being faithful enough to it in order to be cast into reality, that the Flame of Frenzy literally did not exist prior to the events referred to in the Fingerprint Stone Shield, that its effects explicitly count as an outer god's influence, that Miquella's needles were designed to cheat, the same way the influence of the Scarlet Rot gets cheated, And the fact that the magic of the Flame of Frenzy is able to be incorporated by Miranda flowers, the same way glintstone sorceries and the Scarlet Rot are, shows us directly that, in fact and despite what its literal proselytizers proclaimed, don't trust the clergy of a death cult, dear readers. The Flame of Frenzy is not actually special from any other form of magic or ideology. What can I say? Their marketing got to me. The magic of the Flame of Frenzy isn't actually different in any tangible way from, say, the magic of the Order of Rot, or the Orders of the Elden Ring. In fact, it isn't even inaccurate to refer to the ideology represented by the Flame of Frenzy as just, straight up, the Order of Chaos. To lay this all out with the rest of the game story, in Elden Ring, the concepts of chaos and order are both 100% imaginary. They are, in-universe, works of fiction. The vision of the Golden Order and the Flame of Frenzy are not based on the world itself, as it objectively exists. They're based on how one chooses to observe that world, as it subjectively exists. Not based on an understanding of reality, like magic associated with the int stat is, but based solely instead on one's own perception of reality. In other words, indeed, one's opinions of it. Identical ideals, simply different targets. As an aside, this is what also I consider to be the literary reason behind the visual effects of Frenzy and Grace putting so much focus around the affecting of people's eyeballs. Alike to how the fundamental sameness between the Golden Order and the Order of Rot is reflected through their shared depiction of pollution, the fundamental sameness between the Golden Order and the Flame of Frenzy is reflected through their shared depictions of altering people's perceptions. An expression of the inherently subjective nature of ideology as a whole, that despite both of them claiming themselves to be so above it all, remain, in truth, entirely the products of. That is to say, for both cases, the visions of both of these ideologies require that the wielders of their magic observe the world as it naturally is, without any interference, and decide then that it is wrong. For the Golden Order, this motivates the changing of the current world, in order to make it match what's decided by it to be right. And for the Flame of Frenzy, this motivates the destruction of the current world, in order to match what it has decided to be right. Indeed, the ideology of the Frenzied Flame, the very concept of chaos in the first place, also had to be taught, just like a certain other set of fingers had to do. And this specifically is where I messed up the most in episode 1. I phrased the concept of chaos as if it was actually distinct from the concept of order, as well as associating chaos with the concept of zero. This was very dumb. For, if one merely thought about it for more than I had, it's noticeable that both the concept of chaos and the concept of order necessarily share the arbitrary invention of a good-bad binary worldview. Here's what I mean. Order as artificial, chaos as natural, a conception so common, and so commonly wrong, for as Elden Ring correctly acknowledges, the concept of order and chaos, on account of the fact that they oppose each other, are then equally artificial. Chaos versus order is not like the relationship between 1 and 0. 0, as can be seen, isn't something with the capacity to oppose things. And the concept of chaos, just as seen, ain't exactly a neutral party in regards to the concept of order, is it? So, rather than how I phrased it in episode 1, as a relationship between 1 and 0, the situation between the ideology presented by the 2 fingers and the ideology presented by the 3 fingers is more like the relationship between, if order is 1 and 0, chaos is 0 and -1. The difference, you see, is solely a perspective one. Because for an observer on this side, over there is the opposite. But for the observer on this side, over there is the opposite. With a starting idea behind it all of there being sides in the first place that are supposed to be distinguishable from each other, of course, being the same mental construct that both ideologies use. It isn't even like order and chaos are two sides of the same coin. They're the same side of the same coin. This is good, this is bad. If you want things to be good, you have to destroy what's bad. Even if what's supposed to be bad is everything. With the concepts of chaos and order being depicted realistically in this way here, being, essentially, to just further the presentation of how ideology exists within the setting of Elden Ring being congruent to how ideology actually exists in real life. Or haven't you noticed? That all being said though, that the ideologies of order and chaos and rot and so forth are all depicted as fundamentally the same kind of thing in Elden Ring setting, in the first place, is not the game's message being that there aren't meaningful differences between these ideologies after the first place. Remember, objectivity and subjectivity have no inherent connection with value, nor with whether something exists or doesn't all by itself. And, as shown by the way magic has been shown to work in this world, subjective information and objective information are both exactly as effective at being used to change the world as the other. The imagination is the imagination. There's not going to be any difference between a stupid person's idea or a smart person's idea if the person following that idea has a spear pointed at your chest fucking anyway. You know what I mean? The point of Elden Ring's world being designed like it is isn't for the totality of Elden Ring's story to end with asking you some basic question like, which ideology is the most legit? It's to end with asking you complex ones, like, should a singular ideology ever be allowed to have so much power as to affect the lives of people who aren't involved? Shit like that, right? Because, rather than something like the game giving you its answer to that first, and then asking how one should get from its point A to your point B, it asks you to wonder about where you would place those points yourselves, potentially thinking about everything in the story that you've yet seen. To continue using this as the example then, should an ideology ever be allowed the power as to decide the fates of other people against their will, if your answer is yes, it should be allowed, that it's worth it, that'd be represented by the Elden Lord ending. With that ending having so many variants because, obviously, the preceding question from that would be which ideology is the most legit. If your answer is no, that presents the next question. Something like, how can the power of ideologies possibly be made limited then? With the potential answers to that being represented by the Age of Stars and the Lord of Chaos endings. The Age of Stars presenting an answer as to limit the power of ideology by limiting the capacity for ideology itself. Ideas, obviously, being imaginary, are inherently untouchable. They're unable to be directly influenced by external means. Or even directly seen. But, since you only can't directly control the thoughts of another person's mind after they've already been made, what if you limited a person's ability to make up one's mind in the first place instead? Like forcing someone from above ground into an allegory of the cave, if the people's ability to personally trust in their observations, of their perception of the external world, or their perception of their internal ones, if the ability to imagine any kind of idea with the mental solidity, or in equal terms, confidence, as to then want to make real, if that itself was removed, then people in the first place deciding to fight, to kill, to enslave each other at all, would thus turn into impossibilities. In other words, as a person without confidence is unable to assert themselves upon others, if it was made impossible to be confident in the first place, then nobody would be able to assert themselves upon others ever, A world then without the capacity for knowing. A world without knowledge. A world where the capability for ideology, and thus ideological conflict, in its totality, was made entirely extinct. A world without the capacity for war itself. That would be better. That would be worth it. Wouldn't it? Would a goal like that truly be worth it? After all, how would something like that be different in the first place from the literal slavery that the Golden Order practiced? Where America's empire repressed people physically, what happens here would just be the repression of people mentally instead. The goal and outcome both, are they not the same? And anyway, wouldn't the idea that this is the answer be, by itself, also an ideology considering it to be too legit to quit? The single decision of a greatest of wills asserting itself over every other as well? Just like the Elden Rings was? If it is, should this hypocrisy be accepted as something somehow necessary, as to be worth it regardless? And if it isn't, boy, how would you reconcile with that? Because after all is really said and done, could it truly not be worth it to just bring the fighting to end? And so on. With the Lord of Chaos ending then saying something here like, it's not worth it. It can't be made limited. Therefore, just destroy the whole thing. All that's wrought from that struggle, from any kind of struggle, will be more pain and more suffering. And even if at the end of this road, which might very well not even have an end in the first place, so that's something you're already gambling on, even if something is found that is legitimately the best, it is not going to be worth its cost. So pack it all up, because even 0 is better than -1. You can see what I'm poking at, right? Because to specify again, those are all legitimately just examples. Written by me to be as deliberately broad as I could manage, while still remaining something I would consider themselves generally accurate to the canonical events of this game's story. Needless for me to say, of course, to discuss the meaning of a work of art makes room for a lot more intellectual freedom than the glorified solving of a jigsaw puzzle my show here is primarily based around doing. What you've just heard, in fact, aren't even what I personally consider to be the actual meanings of Elden Ring's endings either. Note how I've neglected to mention anything regarding the actual characteristics of the character themselves involved with each ending. The shared aspect and scope that all the endings have equilaterally amongst each other, that being a focus on the influence of just our planet's Erdtree, where we know for a fact we aren't the only living people in the universe. Or the million billion other, indeed, subjective aspects that actually make Elden Ring's narrative as compelling, or, well, good, as it is. Everything else that exists to be interpreted by its myriad audience. I mean, if I was to actually describe my own actual thoughts regarding all this stuff, I'd have to talk some like 70 or 80 minutes each, at least. And besides, what kind of person do you think I am? I ain't some literary analyst, or some nerd book-reading princess. I'm just a sniper. In fact, to repeat the ending of episode 1 appropriately, for the end of this video, My eyes and I are only here to tell you what is. Everything else is up to you. What? Ranni? Did you just say something? And for the next episode, I hope you're excited for volcanoes.